The theory of social character. Psychoanalytical theory was enriched when its understanding of unconscious motivations was broadened to include not only libidinal drives, but also the human need to relate to others and the person's position within the economic social system in which he or she developed and performed. The sociopsychological approach proposed by Fromm was to understand the structure of the individual mind focused on the unconscious around the dynamic concept of character as described by Freud. The concept of social character considers that just as psychoanalysis studies the character of an individual in terms of analyzing the underlying forces which in a structuralized form make up his character and motivate him to feel and think in certain ways, the character common to a whole group, social character, has the same dynamic function and can be studied empirically. Social psychoanalysis intends to apply psychoanalytic categories to the study of social groups by the minute examination of the personality of each member of the group through the interpretative questionnaire, and by simultaneous and equally minute observation of the socioeconomic data and cultural patterns. It can eventually attempt to use defined statistical methods for the systematic analysis of data. The theory of social character developed by Erich Fromm sustains that the significance of experience is intimately linked to the material conditions under which persons located in a specific economic system live. The shared character traits thus correspond to the social role that these persons play. In the case of women, existing literature does not focus on their function as reproducers of the workforce within the family, although this is a generalized function and additional to out-of-home work. In this presentation, we will first introduce social character theory and its theoretical origins, then focusing the reproductive function of women because it has such a transcendent importance to the development and emotional health of children. Mother's role was highlighted by Fromm as primary to the infant in comparison to the later one of father, and has amply been proven by Bowlby's attachment theory as transcendent in her role of primary caregiver. This has been confirmed through a vast number of longitudinal research projects. We will next briefly introduce the central aspects of Bowlby's attachment theory, as well as longitudinal prospective research. Empirical research studies that have confirmed, one, that variations in the quality of infants' attachment relationships are based on patterns of interaction between infants and their caregivers early in the first year. And two, that these variations in the quality of attachment are foundations for later personality organization, for psychological health and disturbance. We will subsequently describe a study that we have conducted of the social character and the caregiving quality of Mexican mothers. Mothers from two groups with contrasted socioeconomic conditions and cultural backgrounds, as are common among urban and rural indigenous groups. We shall illustrate our interest in the transcendent role of mother in the emotional development of the children. We are in the process of a longitudinal follow-up on some of the dyads from the Mexican study. We will exemplify with a vignette the evolution of one of the girls we studied in her attachment relations with her mother, her primary caregiver, when she was an infant. We will describe the central tendencies of her character traits as shown through her responses to the interpretative questionnaire at 8 to 9 years of age, and again at 18 years, complemented by the house three-person drawing. In this case, we can see a favorable and coherent evolution from an autonomous, receptive, productive mother to a secure infant who has become a vital young woman centered on being as opposed to on having, with love and joy of life, sensitivity to her own and others' options. She is active, interested in everything in which she participates. Theoretical background. Social character theory starts, according to Fromm and Macaulay, from the discovery of the dynamic concept of character as one of Freud's greatest contributions to the science of man. The essential point of his first paper, The Anal Character, was that certain behavior traits, namely stubbornness, borderlines, and parsimony, were more often than not found together as a syndrome of traits. Wherever that syndrome existed, one could find peculiarities in the sphere of toilet training and vicissitudes of sphincter control, and in certain behavioral traits related to bowel movements and feces. Freud showed that the three original traits of the syndrome, which until then appeared to be quite unrelated among each other, formed part of a structure or system because they were rooted in the same source of anal libido, which manifests itself in these traits either directly or by reaction formation or sublimation. In this way, Freud was able to explain why these traits are charged with energy and, in fact, very resistant to change. The same procedure was applied to the study of oral receptive and oral sadistic character and to the concept of genital character. The dynamic concept of character traits is different from the behavioral traits. Behavioral traits are adaptive and change easily when the conditions change. They are the result of learning. Character traits, on the other hand, are part of a dynamic system, the system character. They change only in as much as the whole system changes, but not independently. The system character is the relatively permanent form in which human energy is structuralized in the process of relating to others and assimilating nature. It is the result of dynamic interaction of the system man and the system society in which he lives, but it differs by not considering that instinct mediates human relationships. There are other functions which are more important in the infant's bond to mother. For example, the infant's sucking to be satisfied as one of mother's function, skin contact as shown even in monkeys by Harlow, and especially unconditional love. Mother is always ready to help, always ready to alleviate discomfort, to respond. She mediates all of reality. She is the world. She is the comforting, all-reliable goddess, at least in the first years of the child's life. Although the character syndromes as described by Freud are accurate and can be confirmed, their theoretical explanations have some significant consequences for the application of character syndromes to understanding social character. The authors Fromm and Maccovey, start not from the libido development as understood by Freud, but from a sociobiological question. What kind of ties to the world, persons and things must and can man develop in order to survive, given his specific equipment and nature of the world around him? Man has to fulfill two functions in order to survive. A, provide for his material needs and for the survival of his group in terms of procreation and protection of the young. Fromm calls this the process of assimilation, receiving them passively receptive, taking by force exploitative, by hoarding whatever he or she has, hoarding, or producing by work what he or she needs, productive. However, man is endowed with self-awareness, with a need to choose, to plan and foresee dangers and difficulties. Being uprooted from his original home within nature by the absence of instinctive determination, the individual could not remain sane even if he took care of all his material needs, unless he were able to establish some form of relatedness to others. His relatedness allows him to feel at home and saves him from the experience of complete affective isolation and separateness, which is the basis of severe mental sickness. B, the process of socialization relating to others. He can relate to others in a symbiotic way, sadistically or masochistically, in purely destructive ways, in a narcissistic way, and in a loving way. In talking of receptive, exploitative, hoarding, and productive orientations, Fromm does not himself subscribe to a form of relatedness to the world that is mediated by forms of the sexual instinct, but to forms of relatedness of the human being to the world in the process of living. It is the energy of a total living organism which tends to survive and express itself. Sociopsychological studies, research, intervention, and participatory action research projects. In Social Character in a Mexican Village, a sociopsychoanalytic study, Fromm and Maccovey tested their approach of the theory of social character and essentially confirmed it through their observation of peasant labor and the type of demands placed upon them by the nascent industrialization of the sugar industry in the state of Morelos, Mexico. The peasant village was composed of homes that, albeit humble, had urban services like streets, electricity, water, and a health center as part of the incipient modernization and industrialization of rural Mexico. The authors mentioned the problem of alcoholism and its negative effects, particularly among receptive, unproductive peasants. Some intervention efforts were made to support young villagers to overcome passive, unproductive tendencies, the adolescents' club, and also to improve the development of children in a center of adopted, extremely poor orphan children, our little brothers. Among other things, the studies of vulnerable populations focus the results on signaling or offering viable alternatives for change. Through the study of social character of specific groups, sociopsychoanalytic projects have started processes aimed to transform them, either as intervention project or as support for participatory action projects. We can only mention as examples here the humanization of the workplace in the US by Maccabee and colleagues, or the understanding of the traditional roots of social character from Eastern and Western Germany teachers by Funk. Attachment theory, its origins, central aspects, and research findings. Bowlby developed attachment theory by connecting attachment, survival, and fear. Starting from the evolutionary theory of Konrad Lorenz's work that was based upon evolutionary theory and on the new science of ethology, which considers species-wide behavioral as well as species-wide morphology in relation to the evolutionary history. Lorenz signaled to the fact that animals can form ties to other individuals as parents on the basis of some kind of biologically channeled behavioral program related to their specific history. The parent identifying program is basic, directly related to survival, and appears in the absence of any other more basic reward. This program only works if the individual to be selected appears within a restricted time period. Hence, the program's full development is dependent upon the environment in which the individual develops. Bowlby grounded attachment theory by signaling to the transcendental importance of early experiences with the caregiver. Attachment behavior, earlier seen as secondary to more basic biologically channeled behavioral systems as feeding, is a primary behavioral system in its own right. It is indeed common across the ground-living primates developed in all but highly anomalous circumstances at about the same age. A survival program, some kind of biological channeled behavioral program related to the species history. Fleeing and maintaining proximity to the attachment figure in terms of alarm, and using the attachment figure as secure base for exploration and play, attachment behavior, is thus seen in attachment theory as a primary behavioral system with immediate tie to survival and to fear. Bowlby proposes that attachment theory arose across the evolutionary history of ground-living primates because it served the biological function of protection from predation. In situations of danger, nomadic ground-living primates flee to an attachment figure as opposed to a den or burrow. Human infants inherit the same gradually developing fear related to brain structures as were used by humans and pre-humans in the environment evolutionary adaptedness. Bowlby discovered thus a new instinctively biased behavioral system with an immediate tie to survival. The attachment behavior system is primary over other instinctively biased systems in ensuring infants' ground-living primate survival. Given persons, not places, are human locations of safety as nomads. Attachment is closely tied to fear. The two central hypotheses formulated by Bowlby were, as mentioned before, are that variations in the quality of infant attachment relationships are based on patterns of interaction between infants and their caregivers early in the first year, and two, that these variations in the quality of attachment are foundations for later personality organization, for psychological health and disturbance. The best form to address this hypothesis is by conducting prospective longitudinal studies, studies in which early patterns of care are directly observed at the time and all later outcomes are directly observed throughout childhood and beyond by independent observers. One of the first prospective studies, which has now 40 years of evolution, is the Minnesota Longitudinal Study at the Institute for Child Development of the University of Minnesota. It started when the mothers were pregnant, and it has followed the development of the participants throughout infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, confirming the main hypothesis in relation to mental health. Attachment theory was part of a revolution in psychology, both in moving away from drive reduction concepts and in moving toward relationship concepts, as opposed to only the study of individual characteristics. Attachment is a relationship concept. In infancy, it refers to the emotional connection and the behavioral coordination between infant and caregiver, attachment figure. It refers to this relationship and not to a characteristic of the infant. When referring to an infant that is securely attached, it means that it is secure in, confident about its attachment with this particular caregiver. All human infants are expected to form attachments with the person or persons that interact with them in a consistent basis. These relationships, however, vary in quality. In some cases, they will be characterized as confident expectations regarding caregiver responsiveness and by effectiveness in using the caregiver as a secure base for exploration. And in some other cases, they will not manifest such expectations. It is hypothesized that such variations derive from the history of interaction with the particular caregiver. Finally, these variations may be observed in the dyadic organization of behavior, that is, the way the infant adjusts behavior with respect to the caregiver in various circumstances across time. Secure infants will explore when external stress is minimal, seek contact when stress increases, and use that contact, physical or psychological, for reassurance, which promotes a return to exploration. In attachment theory, the infant is seen as born and embedded in an organized relationship matrix from which self emerges. Such a viewpoint solves a complicated problem in the study of personality. If we cannot simply assume the fully formed personality exists from the beginning, and we cannot assume something coming from nothing, we can assert that the complex organization that is the person was in fact previously in the infant-caregiver relationship. By 1985, two of Bowlby's major hypotheses had already received considerable support. First, Variations in the quality of an infant's attachment to parents have been shown to be related to the child's interactive history with the parent, based on direct observations in the natural environment. Moreover, such variations in the security of attachment have been shown to predict key aspects of the child's functioning throughout the early years of life, including compliance, self-esteem, self-management, and independence. These were important achievements suggesting the great power of relationship assessments, such as the Ainsworth Strain Situation Procedure, the home observations assessed through the Mary Ainsworth scales on sensitivity, cooperation, and rejection, and the Mary Main Adult Attachment Interview for empirically studying and for understanding individual development. Bowlby's attachment theory is a theory of psychopathology as well as a theory of normal development. It contains clear and specific propositions regarding the role of early experience in developmental psychopathology, the importance of ongoing context, and the nature of the developmental process underlying pathology. In particular, Bowlby argued that adaptation is always the joint product of developmental history and current circumstances, never either alone. Early experience does not cause later pathology in a linear way, yet it does have a special significance due to the complex, systematic, transitional nature of development. Prior history is part of current context. It plays a role in the selection, engagement, and interpretation of subsequent experience and in the use of available environmental support. Finally, except in very extreme cases, early, not secure anxious attachment is not viewed as psychopathology in itself or as a direct cause of psychopathology, but as an initiator of pathways probabilistically associated with later pathology. While it is not proper to think of attachment variations as directly causing some outcomes, and while early attachment has no privileged causal status, it's nonetheless the case that nothing can be assessed in infancy that is more important. Infant attachment is critical, both because its place in initiating pathways of development and because of its connection with so many critical developmental functions: social relatedness, arousal modulation, emotional regulation, and curiosity, to name just a few. Because development is cumulative, always building upon itself, early attachment relationships set an initial direction for development. Because individuals seek, select, and react to later experience within the framework of attitudes and expectations formed in attachment relationships, there is a tendency for these early pathways to be followed in a cascadian manner. Of course, early attachment experiences are open to change. Still, they are not discarded. They remain either as factors that promote growth or leave individuals more vulnerable to adversity and developmental challenge. A study of social character and attachment in Mexico City and in an indigenous village. In 1997, we started a research project based on two psychoanalytic theories that share an emphasis on relational processes that form the psyche. The social character theory by Erich Fromm and the attachment theory by John Bowlby. The project studied diets of mothers and their infants from a middle-class urban mestizo population in Mexico City and from a rural peasant Nahua population from the mountains of northern Puebla. The later one was in collaboration with a 40-year-old community development project known as PRADE. We shared the results with two institutions in Mexico City, the Breastfeeding League and a Natural Delivery Training Center that collaborated with us. In Puebla, with PRADE and its efforts to enhance the quality of life in the community and to support the local human rights commissions in the area by providing them with the knowledge of the common manifestations of the psychological effects of mental fragmentation resulting from adults and children traumatic experiences. Caregiving quality and social character. We identify the prevailing social character orientations of mothers in the urban and rural groups and sorted them into 5 socioeconomic groups: middle, middle upper, middle middle, middle lower, impoverished, and very impoverished. Mothers' responses to the interview were written down and typed up by the interviewers. The typed interviews were then scored on the 6 scales specifically developed by SEMSOAC. 4, detecting mothers' unconscious attitudes toward their lives and towards their children. A, sensitivity to emotional needs. B, lovingness. C, joy of life. D, attention to everyday survival needs of their children. E, passive hopelessness, and F, active violent hopelessness. We observed whether the individual responses showed a mother to be productive or unproductive on Fromm's understanding of productiveness, as will be specified here below, and compare the 2 groups. Within each group, we juxtapose the responses of the 5 socioeconomic levels. As we read through the entire interview transcript, we identified and marked the elements that pointed to particular traits as defined in each scale, sometimes in subtle yet meaningful ways. We then listed them together and we arrived at a point score ranging from 1 to 5, taking into account all the responses and representing each of them with one number. We once again examined the interviews as a whole and discussed in clinically oriented group sessions where we classify them as receptive, hoarding, exploitative, authoritarian, or self-development, and within each of these as to whether they are mainly productive or unproductive according to the liveliness or lifelessness of their expressions. Once we had assessed the dominant character orientation of each of the mothers, we grouped them according to the basic tendency toward their productiveness or unproductiveness as follows. We grouped together productive mothers, including receptive, productive, hoarding, productive, self-developer, self-affirming, because all of these show they have been able to realize their potentialities. They have an internal life that favors life, love, and work, not merely a life that is reactive to external events or authorities. They have an emotional life which leads them to use their strengths to deal with and affect their lives. Spontaneous activity is understood to mean activity of their own initiative. In this group, we observe a certain freedom, a life with meaning, not dominated by fear or dependence on authority figures, but which generate with their own powers in reality and not merely reproduce reality. In their dreams, adversity is not absent. The dreamer may feel powerless, but she shows a strength or inner activity that enables her to respond, to do something, run, scream, defend herself, and often find a solution. We grouped mothers with an unproductive orientation, including receptive unproductive, hoarding unproductive, exploitative authoritarian, because they share a tendency to not realize their potentials. They lack their own activating or energizing force. In this group, the passive tendency prevails. These women are incapable of facing or changing a given situation or of influencing events. They have a sensation of emptiness and of their vital energy being diminished or depleted by the conditions of life, by external forces. They express what they do in self-effacing terms, absent of emotional life, acting as a robot or automaton. The general character orientation gives priority to material, to appearances, to objects, to money and power over relationships and people. Then we compared the social character measures with the attachment measures obtained in the intergenerational relations of attachment for the two groups, but adding 5 urban dyads of adolescent mothers that we had also studied who live and work in the streets. The social interpretative questionnaire. The social interpretative questionnaire is analogous to a social and personal psychoanalytic interview in which the psychoanalyst and the researcher that interviews a person tries to understand the unconscious meaning of certain phrases and statements used by the patient or the respondent of the interview, the meaning of which he did not intend to express or is not aware of expressing. By analyzing each answer to the totality of the answers to the questionnaire, Fromm's proposed method attempts to arrive at the knowledge of the dynamic tendencies of the respondent's character most relevant to his social and political attitudes, a character structure found in each questionnaire with all others and with objective data such as age, income, sex, and education. The main difference between this type of interpretative questionnaire and most other questionnaires used in the social research is not that one is open and one is pre-formulated, but that the answers are used in different ways. The main effort is not to choose an adequate sample of relevant questions and toward the most fruitful statistical elaboration of them, but to interpret the answers with regards to the unconscious or unintended meaning. The task of interpretation is, like any other psychoanalytic interpretation, difficult and takes a great deal of time. It requires knowledge of psychoanalytic theory and therapy, including the experience of one's own analysis, a clinical psychoanalytic experience, and, as in everything else, skill and talent. Uncertainty is the price the psychoanalytic research has to pay for attempting to arrive at a deeper understanding of the most relevant data. The scales for rating mothers' unconscious attitudes towards their lives and towards their children in the social interpretative questionnaire. A, sensitivity toward their children's emotional needs. This scale deals with the mother's ability to perceive, notice, experience, impressions, and sensations to identify the range of feelings, emotions, and communications of another human being, in this case, her child. The mother is in a state of vigilant serenity, open to all changes relating to her child's situation. This scale establishes the degree to which the mother is alerted and empathic, but above all accessible to her children, or to those who need from this person for her to respond promptly and appropriately without distortion and in a manner consistent with their need. Lovingness. This scale refers to the responses to the interpretative questionnaire that have to do with the ability or capacity of the interviewee to show affection to their children. Lovingness in this scale involves various elements: caring for, physical contact, embracing, comforting, respect, and knowledge. Joy of living. This scale deals with the existence and degree of the presence of a vibrant sense of joy in the life of people, particularly her children, but also her own and that of others. The person shows interest and seems awake, lively, tends to establish significant loving relationships, demonstrates capacity to enjoy and take pleasure from the activities she performs, expresses delight, is pleased by growth, development, which sprouts from the earth or what just been born. D, instrumental attention to her children's daily survival. This scale measures the extent to which, through questionnaire responses, we may infer that the interviewee fulfills her duties and functions as mother of her children. She provides them with basic care. It also takes into account general aspects of responsibility toward herself and others. The mother responds with attention, care, promptly and directly to her child's needs for survival and physical care. E, passive hopelessness is an emotional state in which defeat and powerlessness to change the adverse conditions of daily life are determinant, placing the subject in a condition of inertia and passive acceptance. This passivity excludes the capacity to even conceptualize, think, or imagine alternate solutions, and in extreme cases may lead them to not even be able to conceive compensatory fantasies or magical thought with regard to the possibility of some solution. F, active or violent hopelessness. This refers to an emotional state in which defeat and powerlessness to change the adverse conditions of daily life are determinant, placing the subject in a condition of irritability, hopelessness, impulsiveness that translates into aggressive or violent actions that can go from subtle harm, whether physical or emotional, to irreparable damage in the most extreme cases. The first three scales, sensitivity to children's emotional needs, lovingness, and joy of living point in the direction of what we think might favor over the long term a humanly significant emotional development in children, and therefore enable them to overcome or contend with adversity, which, in our view, is not the exception, but rather the rule for human development. The fourth scale, instrumental attention to children's daily survival, refers to the mother's capacity to provide the essential, minimum, basic, and necessary elements for development, offering her children an organized lifestyle. The last two scales, passive hopelessness and violent hopelessness, in our view, may be contrary to or oppose the children's significant emotional development and denote character traits in the mother that may indicate an affective or traumatic loss, which would not tend to facilitate the capacity to overcome adversity, either through resignation, the inability to search for acceptable alternatives or outcomes expressed as passive hopelessness, or through violence, retaliation, and hopelessness expressed as active or violent hopelessness. The elements expressed in each scale, sometimes in subtle but meaningful ways, are identified and marked in order to arrive at point score or grade, indicating the extent to which each characteristic seems to be present in the interviewee's treatment of her children. The scales have to do fundamentally with the mother in relation to the emotional needs of her children. The traits manifested throughout all the questionnaire responses are identified by marking the respective passages. With a rating from these 5-point scales, we then try to determine which characteristics are outstanding, how prominent or reticent they are, since many times a number of tendencies can be present simultaneously, although in different proportions and degrees. Each scale is rated globally on the basis of what appears throughout the questionnaire and on what can be detected from the responses viewed as a whole. Results. Attachment research has documented the importance of the meaningful relationship established by the infant to its principal caregiver, the central role played in its establishment by the quality of care offered to the infant, and how much, in turn, the coherence of the caregiver's state of mind, as seen through the adult attachment interview, weighs on the quality of care the caregiver provides. These studies are varied and consistent in their findings. Longitudinal studies provide strong data confirming the transcendental and long-lasting consequences of the infant's attachment to its caregiver. We found significant relations among the attachment instruments, confirming the core findings in the field of attachment through contrasting socioeconomic and cultural groups. The systematic examination of social character traits on the answers to the social character interpretative questionnaire in the contrasting economic groups is promising. The receptive orientation was predominant in both groups. In the urban group, the receptive productive orientation prevailed. In the rural group, the receptive unproductive orientation was the most common. We found a statistically significant relationship between mothers' basic attitudes toward life and toward their children on the 6 5-point scales and their basic character orientation through the social interpretative questionnaire, whether productive or unproductive, looking at the urban and rural groups combined. We found significant relationships between basic productive and unproductive tendencies in mothers and the blindly coded attachment assessments. Our secure attachment, our results confirm that mothers with productive orientations have babies with a secure attachment pattern more often than mothers with unproductive orientations. Productive mothers tend to be more sensitive, cooperating in the treatment of their babies, and more frequently present autonomous, secure transcript as scored blindly on the adult attachment interview. 4. Our results suggest that the daily material conditions of existence are closely related to the shared character orientations, especially the tendencies toward productive or unproductive orientations in the very impoverished mothers. Mothers fitting into a very impoverished category in the rural group were almost exclusively unproductive, even compared to mothers from the impoverished category, the vast majority of whom were productive. The contrast was even greater when we compared the very impoverished to other socioeconomic levels studied in this rural group. On the other hand, upper middle and upper class mothers in the urban group were more likely to be rated unproductive than middle lower and middle income groups, although the results did not reach a statistical significance. This finding points to our consideration that being able to count on economic resources beyond those required to fulfill basic everyday life needs does not necessarily lead to a better quality of life or caregiving. This is seldom consciously acknowledged. We conducted a follow-up assessment of the children who were assessed on attachment when they were infants, when they became 8 to 9 years old. This follow-up involved the clinical systematized appraisal of their responses to the social interpretative questionnaire adapted for children from 6 to 14 years and their responses to pairs of stories resembling those of Piaget's designed to explore cognitive moral reasoning, and such as asking children to draw their family and comment on their family history. We are in the process of studying these children now at their 18 to 19 years of age and adapting the scales equivalent to the 6 5-point scales used to score the mother's attitudes toward their lives and their children. We are coding the children's and youngsters' responses to the social interpretative questionnaire on joy of living, sensitivity to their own and others' feelings and emotional needs, harmonious relations with parents and other authorities, siblings rivalry, and passive hopelessness and active violent hopelessness. A vignette from a urban lower medium class participant. Esperanza was about to turn 18 when we interviewed her to conduct a follow-up on her development as a part of the longitudinal study. Her parents belong to the lower middle class. They sell arts and crafts in a town not far from the capital of the state of Morelos, also not far from the village that Fromm and Maccabee studied. Her mother is flexible in that she has accepted to personally care for the daughter of her eldest son, Esperanza's brother, who impregnated his girlfriend without having established a serious commitment to become her partner. He failed to establish such a relationship with an attempt to live with his girlfriend and the child in his family's home. After conflicts between them, the couple separated. The child has been left to live with the son's family, and Esperanza's mother happily takes good care of her. The child's mother takes her and cares for her on the weekends. We have known Esperanza since she was 12 months old, when her mother accepted an invitation from a colleague from the Seminario to take part in the study of social character and attachment. Both parents didn't finish their high school studies. Esperanza is productive, receptive, and self-affirming, emotional, balanced, shows judgment and a sense of humor. She readily accepted, participated in the interview after we explained to her again what it was about, as she told us she had not understood very well the explanation that the previous interviewer had provided. The previous interviewer conducted the Mary Main adult attachment interview that may have had an important emotional effect on her. The questions in the interpretative questionnaire, along with the house three-person drawing, took place in her room in the family home. They indicate her love of life, which we scored as maximally high on the scale of joy of living, 5, high sensitivity to her own feelings and to those of others, 4, high harmonious relations with parents, 4, whom she describes in a balanced way, with qualities and defects. Her father angers easily, is very hard-hearted, is jealous of boyfriends, but protective, spoils me and cuddles me. She describes her mother as loving, very affectionate, worries, nice, always wants to know where we are going. There are several, they are severe at setting limits. Her lack of rivalry with her siblings, scale 1, is notable, as well as her lack of passive hopelessness and her violent hopelessness scales. Esperanza lets us know she really likes children and animals. What she likes most of Mexico is the jungle in Chiapas with its precious animals, the existence there of the Mayas. She appears to be still a bit dependent on her parents for her age. We wonder if this could be related to the fact that she was diagnosed with epilepsy when she was 12 years old. A couple of times, in sudden crisis, she fell in the street. These crises appear to be controlled with medication, although there are times when she appears to have periods when she is as if not there. All this obviously alarmed her parents, who were severely instructed by the diagnosing physician to avoid all future risks. They do so by restricting her outings. She's always accompanied when she goes out. Perhaps the story she invented of a boy that she told in the questionnaire is a projection of her desires to disobey, given that the protagonist disobeys his grandmother's instruction to not leave the house. He goes to the woods and gets lost for a time, but finally finds his way back without consequences. She seems to be a bit uneasy about her incipient sexual awakening and the possibility of disobeying the authorities in general. She describes the severity of her parents when she has behaved badly and considers the response just because she understood and corrected herself. She also mentions an episode when her father overreacted, applying physical punishment because he had taken seriously the completely unfounded gossip of a cousin. We also learned of her one school misbehavior, having failed 2 subjects. Her father did not allow her to take makeup exams to which she had a right. They, father and mother, withdrew her from school for 6 months and put her to work. She seems to have enjoyed working, as when she asked for and they gave her a second chance to study, she voluntarily found another job to work on the weekends. Since then, she says she learned her lesson and has performed as an outstanding student. She wishes to become a social worker or a teacher to work with children and adolescents because those are nice ages. She has an excellent self-concept, describing herself as happy, although I can be quick to anger. She adds, laughing, "My friends say I have a very high self-esteem because I tell them I am a real beauty." We noted an excellent level of the moral reasoning as she gave high quality answers to all the Piaget moral reasoning stories. She is flexible with the helpless, also turning toward justice, defending herself if an injustice is committed against her, showing high indices of self-affirmation. There only remains to us an unease about her fear of white dolls made of porcelain, because they can start to move on their own, as she tells us she's seen in movies, perhaps magically thinking or underdeveloped. At the end of the interview, she commented that she enjoyed the interview because it touched on subjects that she had never thought about before. Some of these comments speak about her open, lively disposition to discover worthwhile opportunities to learn from each experience. Her house 3-person drawing at age 18. Her drawing is balanced with the sun, birds, and clouds. The house has an entry door. The little girl is smiling. On the second page, the male figure is disproportionately large. He's also smiling, but has kind of vacant eyes. He almost doesn't fit in the page. The story refers to solving problems by adequate means, offering satisfaction of the needs of the birds that peck on the roof of the house. They are offered food by her, leading them toward the woods to distance them from the house. The story she invents to the drawing alludes to the conflict of the process of separating from her parents, goes to the woods to bring away the birds from the house. Her parents offer her in the story a positive answer of recognition to her solution, but immediately infusing fear fear for leaving them. The story of the male figure mentions his hate and material interests, blue pants, where he keeps his money, purple shirt, the one he likes most, given to him by his aunt, whom he is happy to go visit. Esperanza's adult attachment interview is autonomous, although it reaches an ambiguous level with no resolution regarding the loss of her maternal grandfather, with whom she had a close relationship as a small child. There is no doubt that important genetic elements could be in play, but examining her attachment background leads us to give importance to the fact that from birth she experienced an affectionate life, especially from her mother and the care of her father. Indeed, the filming of home observations of her at 12 to 15 months show her mother attending to her with great sensitivity and cooperation, 8 and 8, with practically the highest scores possible, which are 9 and 9 on Ainsworth standardized scales. The study of the mother when Esperanza was a baby showed her on the adult attachment interview as autonomous, but initially as unresolved to the loss of her own mother, Esperanza's grandmother, that had happened recently. However, 2 years later, the interview was redone, and she had overcome this point, being clearly classified as autonomous. 17 years ago, Esperanza's mother also responds to the social character questionnaire, where she appears very similar to what we see in Esperanza today. Social character traits are productive, receptive, and secondarily productive hoarding. There are high scores on sensitivity to her feelings and those of her children, 4.5, loving, 4, joy of life, 4, instrumental attention to daily survival needs of her children, 4, very little passive hopelessness, 2, and almost no violent hopelessness, 1.5. All the information we acquired about Esperanza throughout the years point to a favorable development. Both the social character questionnaire at 8 years and at 17 years, 11 months show her basically oriented to being and not to having. This leads her to learn and overcome the difficulties that life presents her, and despite the risks of her sickness. We must say that during these 17 years, not all the cases we have studied have been so congruent nor so favorable. Conclusion. Our work as members of the Seminario de Sociopsicoanálisis (SEMSOAC) was aimed to widen our clinical perspective by applying the socio-psychoanalytic insights contributed by Fromm to understand the difficulties of everyday life of people in their community, including in particular the raising of children in economically difficult conditions. We strove to participate in shared initiatives with those groups to develop practical health enhancing and developmental strategies for their children. The people have found these efforts stimulating. In the course of our study, we realized that people are able to overcome hopelessness and resistance to change as they examine the common civil, voluntary, and creative alternatives available for them. we consider these findings a parallel benefit to the one offered to the individual in clinical practice when becoming conscious of their unconscious motivations. The SEMSOAC has made progress developing a methodology for conducting empirical studies of social character of women and children in Mexico. The design of our research allowed us address and work with very diverse socioeconomic populations. We have developed a special scales to detect character traits of mothers, and we have developed similar scales for their children. Individual responses to the social interpretative questionnaire have proven to be useful for discovering the effects of unconscious motivation accompanying people in their everyday life concerning behaviors that affect their children's development. We have seen that the insecure children from middle-high income families whose professional mothers, in spite of the resources available, confront the loneliness of not working outside the home, isolated in the nuclear family, and sorrowful about not being able to earn a living nor unfold their potentials outside the home. Other children coming from very poor peasant families which undergo extreme economic survival stresses illustrate their mother's hopelessness, depressive suffering. Both opposite conditions seem to impact in a significant way the primary experiences of the infants with their mothers as principal caregivers. We have seen that in general, support networks may alleviate to some extent the formal limitations faced by women in both groups. We would take into account and explore further how much the Nahua peasant young couples living in extended families that are considered poor but not very poor count with the support of their relatives and with the daily stimulating presence of other children as well as relatives, and with poverty informal networks which provide for informal resources such as festivities, beliefs, and traditional medicine to substitute for the formal economic limitations. From the challenge we face to integrate attachment research with socioeconomic perspective, we learned that economic resources considered in an abstract sense can be misleading and must be examined in the specific cultural and daily customs. In approaching such different experiences in such contrasting samples, it is crucial to flexibly utilize diverse and complementary procedures to obtain reliable and meaningful results. Systematical assessment of social character and attachment relations can be used as excellent tools for stimulating the development of socially responsible health policies, taking psychoanalytic insights out of the therapeutic individual context into the social world to favor children's emotional development. Thank you.